For a moment I did not know what had happened. I heard the laughter of the peasants. My head was spinning from the beating and the rolling of the barrel. I was choking with blood. I felt my face swelling. Suddenly I saw the Silent One. Pale and trembling, he was trying to get me out of the barrel. The peasants, calling me a gypsy stray, laughed at his efforts. Afraid of further attacks, he started rolling the barrel with me inside towards a water fountain. Some village boys ran along, trying to trip him and take it away. He warded them off with a club until we finally reached the fountain. Soaked with water and blood, with splinters sticking in my back and my hands, I crawled out of the barrel. The Silent One supported me with his shoulder as I staggered along. We reached the orphanage after a painful walk. A doctor dressed my cut mouth and cheek. The Silent One waited outside the door. When the doctor left, he contemplated my lacerated face for a long time. 2 weeks later, the Silent One woke me at dawn. He was covered with dust, and his shirt clung to his perspiring body. I gathered that he must have been out all night. He signaled me to follow him. I dressed quickly, and we were soon outside with no one the wiser. He took me to the derelict hut, not far from the railroad crossing, where we had oiled the points. We scrambled onto the roof. The Silent One lit a cigarette, which he had found on the way, and gestured for me to wait. I did not know what it was all about, but I had nothing else to do. The sun was just beginning to rise. Dew was evaporating from the tar paper roof, and brown worms started to crawl out from under the rain gutters. We heard the whistle of the faraway train. The Silent One stiffened and pointed with his hand. I watched the train appear in the distant haze and slowly come nearer. It was market day, and many of the peasants took this first morning train, which passed some of the villages before dawn. The carriages were filled, baskets stuck out of the windows, and people hung on the steps in bunches. The Silent One drew closer to me. He was perspiring, and his hands were moist. He licked his drawn lips from time to time. He brushed back his hair. He stared at the train, and suddenly he seemed much older. The train was approaching the crossing. The cramped peasants leaned out of the window, their blond hair flying in the wind. The Silent One squeezed my arm so hard that I jumped. At that same moment the train's locomotive veered aside, twisting violently, as if pulled by some invisible force. Only the 2 front cars followed the engine obediently. The others hobbled, and then like frisky horses started climbing on one another's backs, falling off the embankment at the same time. The crash came with a tumultuous crunch and screech. A cloud of steam shot up in the sky, obscuring everything. Screams and cries came from below. I was stunned and trembled like a telephone wire struck by a stone. The Silent One sagged. He gripped his knees spasmodically for a while, looking at the dust settling slowly. Then he turned and dashed for the stairs, pulling me along after him. We quickly returned to the orphanage, avoiding the crowds of people rushing to the scene of the accident. Ambulance bells were clanging somewhere not far away. At the orphanage, everyone was still asleep. Before going to the dormitory, I took a good look at the Silent One. There was no trace of tension in his face. He looked back at me, smiled softly. If it had not been for the bandage over my face and mouth, I would have smiled too. During the next few days, everyone at school talked about the railroad disaster. Blackboarded newspapers listed the names of the casualties. The police were looking for political saboteurs suspected of previous crimes. Over-the-track cranes were lifting the carriages, which were entangled with one another and twisted out of shape. On the next market day, the Silent One hurried me to the marketplace. We pushed through the crowd. Many of the stands were empty, and cards with black crosses informed the public of the deaths of the owners. The Silent One looked at them and signified his pleasure to me. We were heading for the stand of my tormentor. I looked up. The familiar shape of the stand was there, with its jugs of milk and cream, bricks of butter wrapped in cloth, some fruit, From behind them, as in a puppet show, popped up the head of the man who had knocked out my teeth and pushed me into the barrel. I looked at the Silent One in anguish. He was staring at the man in disbelief. When he caught my glance, he grabbed my hand, and we quickly left the market. As soon as we reached the road, he fell down on the grass and cried as though in terrible pain. His words muffled by the ground. It was the first time that I had heard his voice.